Good evening, everyone. We are back with episode 28 of Pints and Quarts, a show presented by Craft Beer Nation. Tonight we've got Michael Tonsmeire of The Mad Fermentationist, and he has written a book, American Sour Beers, and it is out now, and it's going to be fun. So stick around and don't touch that mouse.
Time now for a look back at the last week in the craft beer industry. Pour a cold one and sit back for an all-new episode of Pints and Quarts, presented by Craft Beer Nation.
All right, we are back, and we are bringing to you another episode, and we've got Michael Tonsmeire. Michael, we are joined here tonight by a couple of our regular panelists. We've got Ashley, Gil, Charles, Lola, Randy, myself, and Michael. Michael, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on. I'm actually doing real well tonight. It's certainly a little cold in Washington, D.C. where I am, but otherwise enjoying a nice glass of Orval, ready to talk about sour beers.
All right. Well, you know, the big news, and one of the great reasons we've got you on tonight is you've got a book out. It's American Sour Beers. Who's published that for you?
The good people at Brewers Publication, which is a wing of the American Homebrewers Association, the Brewers Association, publishers of, pretty much every great brewing book there is out there, from How to Brew to Wild Brews to the Malt, Yeast, Water, Hop series. And I was really honored that they had any interest in being involved with the project. I'd actually started writing it about a year before submitting it to them for publication, and they jumped at it. I guess they'd been looking for someone to do a book about American sour beers for a couple years, and a lot of great brewers had sort of said, well, you know, things are still so in flux. Everything's still changing. And for me, it's some point you just gotta, make a point and do it, and that's what I did. I started talking to brewers, and 3 years later, it finally came out in last spring.
I guess if things change, then you can just write another book in a few years, right? So
exactly, it's a one-man pyramid scheme.
It really is. It really is.
It's kind of like textbooks.
Exactly, just have every annual edition, move the pages around, change the answer key a little bit.
Yeah, that's right.
And charge $40 for an update.
Exactly. I wish I had that sort of margin.
So I picked up the book in November, probably the second week. I'm about the wood portion. I think that's chapter 12. My biggest complaint about your book so far is there's way too much good information in the book.
Okay.
I think it's a 2 or 3 read kind of book. I totally missed the Solera reference on, I want to say it's page 112 or 113.
Yeah.
Once I went back and read it, I'm like, oh, I do remember reading that, but I was just talking to somebody last night, and he mentioned Solera, and it totally flew over my head. So I said, yeah, Solera. But now going back and reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. So I have to say, great job.
It's hard. The first time you write something like this, I just wanted to have every piece of information in there. My biggest complaint about any book I ever read is, oh man, they could have just asked this. They had that brewer talking shop. Why couldn't they have just asked this one crucial question? And so when I gave them the first manuscript, I think I was at maybe 150,000 words, and my contract said I think 40 to 60,000 words. Because my idea was to write every single thing down, and eventually I think we got down to about 120, but that involved paring out some whole chapters. There was a chapter on kvass, there was a chapter on saison, there was a chapter on tasting and pairing sour beers. The great thing about having a blog, I could just put all that stuff up there for free and have the real essential stuff in that 120,000 words.
So when they make the movie, is it going to be like The Hobbit? They're going to try to make 3 movies.
Break it into 3 movies? Yeah.
At least, judging from how long the actual Hobbit is, this might be a 6-movie deal.
I know. So you're going to get your money, don't worry.
Hunger Games would have been a much better movie if it was based on your books.
I think so.
Just saying.
Thirsty Games.
The Thirsty Games. There you go.
Oh, it's a good time. It's a good time to have a beer about sours, right? Because this is the explosion of sours last 8-9 months is just amazing.
Oh, it certainly seems anytime you see a new brewery opening, pretty much every single one says, oh, here are our core beers, and we are going to have a real committed barrel program. We'll be doing sours. We've got big plans for 100% Brett beers. It really seems like a hot topic right now, and so I got lucky on that mark.
I'll ask my brewery. I have a brewery just 3 blocks away from my house, and we were talking the other day, and I said, well, I didn't see any sours from you guys. And he made a comment that you guys have no idea how dangerous it is to make sours in a small brewery. Can you talk a little bit about that? What gets involved when you're working with wild yeast and stuff like that?
Sure. And the big risk with sour beers, if you're doing a real traditional, authentic souring technique, we're using bacteria like Lactobacillus and Pediococcus and wild yeast like Brettanomyces, is that those wild microbes, and they're not in all cases, strictly speaking, wild. A lot of them were cultured 40 or 50 years ago, and you can buy them from a yeast lab. But they're wild in the sense that they haven't been domesticated. They haven't been tamed like Saccharomyces. And so Brettanomyces is capable of fermenting much longer carbohydrates than brewer's yeast is. Pediococcus, too. They can often survive in much smaller numbers. It can just take a few thousand Brettanomyces cells to really wreak havoc on a beer, where if you had a few thousand lager yeast cells in your American ale, you probably wouldn't even notice. Even more than that, you might not notice. So it really then comes down to how risk-averse you are as a brewery. I consult for Modern Times. Our head brewer has worked, Matt has worked at, he was the head brewer at Lost Coast previously and Speakeasy before that. I mean, he's a real production brewer, and he is confident in his process. He heat pasteurizes everything, all the lime.
And our guest is frozen in time. He was dropping some incredible knowledge on us, and let's see if he comes back from the nether.
It's built up, and the sanitizer can't touch that little particular piece of your equipment. The Brettanomyces, the Lactobacillus, the Pediococcus will live, and then they can cause problems. And so it really depends on how much you want to separate your equipment. I keep all of my old clean gear stuff. I sort of hand it down. I pass it down to my sours after a year or two when it starts to look pretty beat up. As a commercial brewery, when we're doing 100% Brett beers, we have separate tanks that we use only for those. But when we needed that tank, when demand for the core beers went up, we simply swapped out all the fittings, put new fittings on, sanitized it. All the kegs are the same. They had a sour beer previously. They just get a double sanitization rinse cycle. So you really, it's maybe sometimes the risk is overstated, but if that's your $10,000 batch of beer that's sitting in the fermenter, it's a little bit harder to say, sure, I trust my process, maybe.
So on the homebrew scale, I like to imagine that if you're gonna try sour beers, it's best to use glass carboys as opposed to plastic because of and Ashley's spoken about this before, how your plastic carboys can get little scratches in them and it can harvest some bacteria that you may not necessarily want to be there. So is it better to use glass carboys if you're going to be trying a sour beer on a homebrew scale?
Only, I would say, if you're planning on also using those carboys again for clean beers. So, for example, I have plastic carboys that once they go sour, that's it. Mm-hmm. They're never going to have a clean beer in them again. And honestly, for plastic carboys or plastic buckets, I wouldn't trust them after a few years anyway. I just think you're putting that racking cane in there. No matter what, they're going to get scratched up a little bit, and so I think you're better off, handing them down, throwing them out after a couple years. If you're using glass, as long as you're sure it's clean first. Cleaning and sanitation are different sort of processes. Mm-hmm. You can't just throw sanitizer in a dirty carboy and expect it to be sanitary. Even if it's glass, you really need to soak it in hot water and a cleaner, so OxyClean Free, PBW, TSP, something like that. Rinse it out and then do sanitizer, and that's really the only way to guarantee you're both removing all the junk, give it a good close inspection, and then go sanitizer.
And when you brew a sour, you just go to your friend's house and then so you don't use their stuff, right?
Exactly. No, that's actually how I started brewing sour beers. Pretty much. At my parents' house, I've been laid off my awful first job after college, and I'd gotten a new job down here in D.C. And I'd always wanted to do a sour beer, and I'd never had the guts to do it. And so I did a couple batches up there, left that equipment up there, didn't want within 500 miles of my clean beers. But now, honestly, I do clean and sour beers right next to each other and have not had any problems since I went to having separate sets of equipment.
So Mike, can you speak a little bit about when you're brewing a sour beer, what's going on differently in that carboy than what's going on in the carboy for a clean beer? Like
Sure.
what are these bacteria or these Brett yeast strains? What are they doing that's not going on in a clean beer?
So in a clean beer, it's a monoculture in most cases. It's a single yeast strain. It's been cultured up essentially from a single organism, a single yeast cell on a plate. It's been scraped off. It's been put into a wort media. It's been grown up. And ideally, that tube you buy from White Labs or Y Yeast or whoever has nothing but that culture in there. Pretty much all yeast does, that brewer's yeast does, is it converts sugars into CO2 and ethanol. It makes some esters, maybe some phenols, minor aromatic compounds in addition to that. But that's sort of the fermentation. When we start talking about sour beers, strictly speaking, sour beers just mean acidic. All beer is technically acidic. Most sour beers are about 10 times more acidic than a clean beer. Pretty similar pH to like a white wine. They shouldn't be, super. They shouldn't taste like lemon juice. They shouldn't taste like vinegar. They should be bright and tart. And that comes from the lactobacillus and the pediococcus, the bacteria, producing lactic acid. Lactic acid is the same thing that makes yogurt tart. It's the same thing that makes buttermilk tart. Lactic, you might think of lactose, like milk. Well, that's where lactic acid comes from, the sort of the name, but can be produced from all sorts of other sugars. So lactic acid is going to be in there about 0.5% to 1% of the total beer, along with alcohol. So you're going to have brewer's yeast too. And then Brettanomyces, people often think about it. They associate it with sour beers. People often, I see posts online, people say, I add Brett, and my beer's not sour for some reason. Brettanomyces can make a beer maybe a hint tart. It's really not going to make a very sour beer.
When I told you before I have a question about an argument we always have,
Yeah.
you just answered that. Because for me, I don't get sour. I don't get enough acidity from Brettanomyces. I just get funky taste.
Exactly, and that's really what Brettanomyces brings.
And it makes no sour beer. They make funky beer for me, and that's just based on my palate.
I know you have had Saison Brett. That is the epitome of Brettanomyces. There are other ways Brettanomyces can display itself, but I like to tell people, if you want to know what Brett's going to do, try a Saison Brett.
Yeah, Saison Brett or Orval.
Right, Orval, because that's one of the oldest Brettanomyces beers.
Yeah, old is certainly intentionally Brett beers. And so that's what really, Brett brings the other interesting flavors. To me, I always liken sour beers to IPAs. To me, sourness is the bitterness. It's a flavor on your tongue. It is one note. You can have different kinds of acids, just like you have different kinds of bitterness, and they might be a little sharper or a little softer. But Brettanomyces, to me, is the hop aroma. That's the interest. That's the fruity, funky. It can be. People say Band-Aid, people say horse blanket. But it can be pineapple, it can be guava, it can be tropical, and citrusy and pineapple and all sorts of wonderful things too.
So and that's the same regardless of which strain of bread is being used.
No, just like ale yeast. We can talk ale yeast, and you can talk Sierra Nevada ale yeast, or you could talk Westmalle ale yeast, or you could talk Weihenstephan ale yeast, and they all have their own unique characters. And so there are really two different species of Brettanomyces that we use in brewing, Anomalous and Bruxellensis. Whenever you see Lambicus, that's actually just another name for Bruxellensis. If you see Clausenii, that's another name for Anomalous. But within those individual species, there's huge range. So take a strain like BSI, Brewing Science Institute, sells a strain called Brett Dre. This was originally cultured up from J&J Blau Gose from Driefonteinen. Adam Avery requested that they do this. And this is a strain that, if you pitch it after a primary fermentation, like a lot of Brettanomyces beers are done, it's okay. It's a little bland, not too exciting. If you use it for primary fermentation, that's all you pitch. You make a big pitch of it just like you would for an ale yeast, and instead of ale yeast, you just pitch this Brett. It's amazingly tropical pineapple. We did a couple IPAs with it right when we opened at Modern Times. And a lot of people, you read reviews online, people say, oh, there's no Brett character, I don't taste anything going on. A lot of that pineapple, and the problem was we did Citra and Centennial and Old Chinook too, so it's similar flavors. But they really work together in this synergistic way where you get big fruit and tropical and citrus just layered on top of each other. Versus something like, I don't know, Y-yeast Brett Lambicus to me is all farmyard, barnyard, horse stall, very manure, very aggressive Brett. To me, almost too much, but some people love it, and I think in a blend it can be complementary.
All right, so I'm on a Facebook group all about sour beers. You probably know about it, Milk the Funk.
Milk the Funk.
And I happen to have a vial of the J. Spontaine Brettanomyces coming my way in the next week or so.
I've gotten a couple emails from people wondering how they can save theirs or what they should do with it, or...
Yes, some wonderful person. I have no idea who it is, but I'm going to get some. I've traded for it, and I'm doing my very, very first beer. It's going to be a 100% Brett IPA. It's going to be Nelson and Maris Otter.
Nice.
So excited. Is there one tip? I mean, obviously I've got your book right here, but is there one tip that you have for making this beer awesome?
Pitch enough Brett. Brett takes a long time to grow, so even you're probably gonna. The person who emailed me said they weren't sure exactly how big the culture would be. They assumed it would be small. You might want to do a 2 or 3 step starter, and I would do like a week in between each step. If you've got stir plate, all the better. But Brett really takes a long time to get rolling. And then at that point, then just treat it like an ale. I would wait until the gravity stabilized before dry hopping. To me, there's nothing better than having a really great Brett flavor with fresh hops. If you add dry hops early and then you end up having to age 2 or 3 months, Brett's great. Brett can protect it will keep scavenging oxygen for months, years even. It'll protect those hop aromas, but they'll still fade.
Right.
You won't get, particularly Nelson tends to be so great fresh and then kind of fall off a cliff after 3 or 4 months maybe. So just do your best. If you're kegging, it's easy. If you're bottling, you've got to be a little more careful. Fermentation should be done after about a month, but sometimes it'll sort of keep on going slowly for a little bit.
Awesome.
Hey, Mike, we've got a question actually from a viewer, Antonio Barunda. He wants to know what role does temperature play in the fermentation and eventually in the flavor when you're doing the sours?
Sure. The biggest risk, and a lot of commercial breweries are very concerned about temperature because they're aging in barrels. The warmer you ferment, in particular, Acetobacter. So this is the same bacteria that makes vinegar. It converts ethanol. It's able to extract more energy out of alcohol by adding oxygen and turning it into acetic acid, vinegar. The real problem with that, a little vinegar is okay, but vinegar, so acetic acid plus ethanol makes ethyl acetate, which smells like nail polish remover, solvent. A little is okay, just a little touch, it can be fruity and pear. More than that, and to me, it's just about the worst flavor a sour beer can have. It's all too common in sour beers, in my opinion. And so higher temperatures encourage evaporation when you're in a barrel, which leads more headspace. The headspace allows the wood to dry out. Warmer temperatures encourage Acetobacter, and you're going to end up with vinegar really quickly. Luckily, if you're aging a carboy or you're aging in a bucket, as long on the bucket is real hard to get. But in a carboy, as long as the airlock stays filled, you're fine. Too hot, you can start getting some sort of Band-Aidy flavor, say over 80 degrees. I try to age my sours in the mid to high 60s for the most part, if I can. Just sort of a slower fermentation, I find that I get a little bit more fruitiness, a little smoother acid profile. But there's no reason, if you don't have conditions like that, to worry about too much.
So, Mike, let me ask you this, and after this, we'll move into our news segment of the show. But going back to the title of your book, American Sour Beers, how do American sour beers in particular compare to, say, some of the more traditional European styles, the lambics, the Goses, the Goses, Flanders Red? How does American sour beers compare to those guys?
I mean, I think Americans have very much done what they've done for all the other beer styles. They start out brewing the traditional ones, and then they put their own twist on it. And so there's some American sour beers which are very true to form. I mean, look at something like Allagash Coolship or Russian River Beatification. Those are closer to what traditional lambic and goose are than probably 90% of the stuff coming out of Belgium when you look at Lindemans, Kriek and Frambois that are really sweet, have artificial sweet flavors in them. But then there are American sour beers that are, 10% alcohol and aged in really characterful barrels, or have interesting fruits or spices in them, things that you wouldn't expect to see in a Belgian sour beer. And that's what's great about American beers in general, is you have all of these unique combinations and unique breweries doing their own thing, whether it's using local microbes or using local fruit or using local barrels or putting interesting combinations of things together. And that's, to me, what the really exciting thing about sour beers is. They're exciting. They aren't as sort of bound to style guidelines as a lot of other beers, and they're real. I think they're just so delicious and so interesting.
Any tips and hints on brewing, like going back to the European style of sour beers? A big thing right now, or at least in the summertime, are Goses. Is there any tips you want to throw out there about brewing Goses? So you sour mash, or should you?
I hate sour mashes.
Okay,
let me add to Randy's question and also say tips for people like me who is scared to death of, should I be scared brewing a sour beer?
So first tips for Goses. My personal bias against sour mashes, if they're done really well, they can make an okay beer. So often to me, sour mashes end up with this sort of Parmesan footy flavor, which is butyric acid. And that happens when any oxygen is allowed to get into the mash. So you can purge the headspace with CO2. You can build up a culture. I find it so much easier just to run off the wort, just like you were, you finish your mash, you run it off, heat it up to 165, 170 degrees, kill all the wild microbes that are in there, and then pitch a known culture of lactobacillus. That could be lactobacillus from white labs or Y yeast. It could be from yogurt. It could be from a probiotic. It could be you can grow a culture off of grain. I would pitch that into a carboy, something else you can seal with an airlock, and let that go to town until you got the acidity you wanted. Bring it back up to a boil. Add a little bit of hops if you want. Add your coriander, your salt, whatever you want. Cool it down, and then ferment with an ale yeast. And that way you don't have to worry too much after that point about contaminating anything else, because you've boiled at this point. All the lactobacillus that was active initially is dead. The turnaround time is very quick. And then you can adjust seasonings. I tend to go very easy on the salt initially and then dose salt to taste at bottling or kegging, just because there's no reason to get it in earlier. There are places that do sour mash as well. I think they're more risk than they're worth. In terms of safety, as long as you've got separate sour gear, you're completely safe. They're not going to crawl out of the fermenter. They're not going to bubble out and cause any problems. But I would be careful, real careful, if you were planning on having anything that touches the sour beer post-boil, touch a clean beer.
All right, so clean brew house practices.
Yeah.
This is the first week of the year here, so as every publication on Earth wants to wrap up 2014 and then make a list of everything coming in 2015, and Ask Men is no different. AskMen.com, and they had an article this week. Randy, take us through that. It's looking ahead to the beers in 2015.
Yeah, so essentially, there's a guy at Ask Men, and he writes a monthly beer column, and like Matt said, wrapping up the year, he kind of looked forward ahead to see what was going to be going on, or at least from his perspective, what he thought were going to be the big beer trends in 2015. So his three predictions are even hoppier beers, more collaborations, and the true rise of the sour beer. Me being a hophead, I used to just be a hophead, but I like everything now. It seems like Matt's always like, we couldn't get Randy to drink a wheat beer 6 months ago. Now he loves them. But even hoppier beers are fine with me. Collaborations are awesome. He talks in the article about how collaborations typically tend to happen with you have one really big brewery and like one smaller brewery. So like the bigger brewery gets to see what the smaller guys are doing, what type of innovative things they're doing, and the smaller guys reap the benefits of the I guess the publication or the
social media going crazy.
There you go. They get to reap the benefits of the big guy, right? And that's always good. We love that. We love collaboration beers. And the third thing he said, as I said before, is the true rise of sour beer. I'd like to get your opinion, Mike, on do you think that sour beers are going to be in 2015 what IPAs started to be about 3-4 years ago, when IPA was the next thing in beers? Everybody was brewing. Now, if you open a brewery now, you have to have an IPA. Is that going to eventually, do you think sour beers are going to get to that level in 2015?
Oh, no. The problem with sour beers is just the volume you can produce is so much smaller, because real sour beers take a real long time. When we're talking IPAs, all it takes is throwing a few more handfuls of hops in there. I mean, obviously there's more to it. I love a good IPA, and there is a lot of finesse and a lot of skill to it. But sour beers really take a different sort of production if you want to do them right. What I don't want to see is a lot of people jumping on that sour beer bandwagon and just buying food-grade lactic acid and dosing it in along with apricot extract and calling it an apricot sour beer. To me, that's not what... It would be like Budweiser taking hop extract and dumping it into Bud Light and saying, oh, here's our new IPA, Bud Light IPA. I think sour beers are getting more popular. To me, sour beers are more poised to be what maybe bourbon barrel imperial stouts were a few years ago.
Okay.
Sort of a niche product that moves more towards the mainstream. That these are sort of become more approachable, more successful flavors. But the price point's always going to be a little bit high for it to be popular, and it's going to be very difficult to have them be a real cornerstone of your brewery. I mean, there's no one who's going to be making huge amounts of sour beer. I mean, even look at somebody like New Belgium that has the biggest sour beer production in the country. And still, I mean, I see Fat Tire 10 times as often as I see La Folie or one of their other sour beers.
So do you think it'll be more of kind of like right now you got Russian River, who specializes essentially in sours. You got folks.
But Russian River, most of their production is Pliny the Elder. I mean, they're known for their sour beer.
Yeah.
Your example would be Jolly Pumpkin, which was one of the originals back in 2004, and they're pretty much they're not anymore, but at least distribution-wise now they're all strictly sours.
Well, the thing with Jolly Pumpkin now is that they also, the same company and Ron Jeffries, the head brewer, oversees North Peak. So I mean, they're. Yeah. To me, I think the trend for 2015 is specialization. I want to see more breweries opening up with a real mission. What always irks me, to me, what makes Cantillon or Orval or Pilsner Urquell special is that they've picked one thing and they really focus on it. I think too many American breweries open up and they go, well, we're going to brew an IPA and a bourbon barrel imperial stout and an ESB and a Pilsner and a Lambic, and we're going to do 10 seasonals, and we're always going to have 15 beers on tap. And it's really easy to brew a whole lot of mediocre beers. It's very hard to brew any really fantastic beers that way.
So we need more.
That is survival too, right? There's an expectation. Unfortunately, beer geekers will expectation about your brewery, and they want to walk in, and you need to be their dream beer, their dream brewery on the first day they experience your beer. They're not willing to be on a journey with you as a brewer anymore, because there's so many brewers out there. You need to be the brewery now,
But I think that's almost the point. There are now so many breweries, you no longer have to be, we're the only brewery that's opening in Ann Arbor, so we want to try to cater to everyone. I think if you try to open up now and you're trying to compete with how many great pale ales and brown ales and porters, and I think you're not going to make an impression. I mean, there are just so many new breweries are opening up that I go and I have a sampler and I just go, these are all kind of forgettable. There's really no mission. Oh, you have an IPA with Citra. Great. You never had that before. That's real exciting.
So more Jack's Abbeys out there.
Yeah. No. Right. Exactly. Jack's Abbey is a perfect example of that. And I mean, they aren't just. It's not. I'm not saying just brew one beer.
Yeah.
They've picked lagers, and that's the thing they're going to kill.
Mm-hmm.
I was really blown away by Cellar Maker at GABF. They are doing fantastic IPAs. They have like 6 different IPAs. They do a couple other things too, but they've sort of, they have this core focus, and then they have a little stuff around them. And I would love to see more of that. More breweries really killing something, really picking something, making it their own.
Look at the Rare Barrel out in Berkeley. That's an amazing.
Completely.
Yeah, like that's a great example. Or maybe Chad at Crooked Stave.
Definitely.
niche stuff. So I think niche is definitely the way you've got to go at this point. There's just too many breweries on the market to go any other way.
Particularly if you're opening up in some place like San Francisco or Colorado, where there are already so many breweries. If you're opening up in a smaller market, I could see going a more traditional route. But just the profit margin on those beers and the amount of excitement you can generate when you're doing something unique and interesting that appeals to the beer nerd community.
So you don't see a place that's going to open up and nail down like 5 amber ales, right? It's
there is a place like that. Was it Black Shirt Brewing in Denver? All they do is red ales.
That's awesome.
There's like a whole bunch of different takes on red ale, but I'm glad that they've taken some that.
Yeah.
It's a unique vision of what a brewery can be.
You have to have a reason to go there. If you're in Denver, you have 30 places to choose from. You have to have a reason to go to this brewery,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would make a flight that much more interesting. 7 versions of a similar beer that you can look for nuances in instead of just, oh, that's a good IPA. Oh, that's a nice ESB. Oh, that's a palatable. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. Hopefully that will come true and your predictions are correct. The other real quick article that Randy found here comes from Westward, and it looks like Randy, just take us into that real quick.
Yeah, so there's a like a social media and networking group out in Colorado. They're called Barley's Angels, and they're essentially it's a networking group for both women in the beer industry and female beer consumers. And they started a job board as of January 1st, and it's run by two people who volunteer for Barley's Angels. Their website is barleysangelscolorado.com. And their goal is basically to list jobs or non-gender specific jobs in the beer industry. And the good thing about it, it says that there was a survey done by the newspaper, and it said that 34% of breweries employees in Boulder, Colorado, in Boulder County, are women, and this number is expected to grow. And we have quite a few females here in the craft beer nation. So we thought that it was important for us to kind of highlight this. Obviously here tonight we have Ashley, who's a certified cicerone. We have Lola here, who's an absolute beer lover. We have Vicky who couldn't join us tonight. She's over there from Tucson. So I mean we have female representation here, and I think it's always good when we can see more and more females being involved in craft beer, because it's not a guy's game. Beer is meant to be social, and social has never been synonymous with male.
Beer is people.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big conception on the market because there's no scientific proof whatsoever, and the studies being done that has any difference on palate based on race or gender. Nothing. We all have the same palate profile. We can all develop taste for anything. It's just and hey, women, they were the brewers from the beginning. We just
we stole it, and and really like all good Americans, Michael was talking about taking a European sour and Americanizing it, and really what we do as Americans is just turn that thing all the way up to 11. I mean that kind of is what it is. And tonight's review of the week comes from a blog called Not Another Beer Review, blogspot.com, but it's about La Folie, which I think really is the quintessential American sour turned up to 11. And here, this is this guy's paragraph. His name is John Jay, that blogs there. A couple of interesting things. When I went to find this, he actually had a link back in his sidebar to the Mad Fermentationist. So he's a fan of Michael's here. But
cool.
It says this is just one of the paragraphs from it. I'm starting off a bit cooler, and we'll see how this fares as it warms. Even on the cool side, this is very sour up front, with sour watermelon, black cherry warheads, apple cider vinegar, a hint of acetone, Granny Smith apples, and tons of citrus. There's wood on the back, and elusive chocolate vanilla abound in the aftertaste. As I walked away from this, I was getting a big raspberry and jam on the aftertaste. As this warms up, you get more apple vinegar and more wood. I'm also picking up a mild Brett funk. So I don't know if you were listening to that paragraph very well, but there was like 15 different descriptions in there. I mean, this guy goes from black cherry warheads to cider vinegar to acetone, down to chocolate vanilla. So
to wild Brett funk.
Right. So sours are really delightful in the fact that they're very complex. And what you just ate within the last half hour has a pretty large impact on how it tastes to you. And I think this guy's review of that beer, he really liked it. I forget what he ranked it, but it was his highest ranking thing.
This guy does a better job explaining sours than I ever could have, because when I drink a sour beer, all I know is I'm like, yeah, it's sour. I have the hardest time. I have the hardest time trying to describe what a sour beer tastes like. And,
yeah.
It takes a while to get your palate used to it.
Yeah. It does, and really the sour beers really accentuate the changes in taste from the front to palate to the back palate. As it goes in your mouth, it's like, wow, I get citrus, I get acidity, I get all these things, and then as your mouth gets used to that, then the other flavors can come through. So I think it's a great tasting. I think it's great to taste sours. It's a lot of fun. A couple of months ago I guess it was way back in the spring now, I guess, but I went with a friend, and he tried Lafayette for the first time, and all of a sudden he's a sour beer guy. This was a porters and stouts and every now and then an IPA guy, and all of a sudden he's out trying to trade for sours and everything he can get his hands on. So the complexity is really what's wonderful about him, in my opinion.
And sours really appeal to a different sort of profile. One of my roommates in college hated beer, still doesn't particularly care for beer, except sour beer. She loves Cantillon. Because she's always loved sour food. She loves sour pickles. She loves all sorts of, she loves wine. And sour beer just was the beer she was looking for. It's that old, if you say you don't like beer, you just haven't found the right beer yet. And for some people, I think for more than a lot of styles, sour beer is that one style that people love.
I'm looking for the right moment to have my wife try sour beer. She hates beer. And, so I'm looking for the right opportunity to get her to try something like that. So
if you can get your hands on it. I was going to say those new Glarus, like the Belgian Red and Raspberry Tart, are such great gateway beers because they have sweetness and sourness. If that doesn't do it there's no hope.
Don't try it. Yeah, don't go any further. Don't waste any good beer on her from there, right? So I'm going to pay for that remark. So there's a release highlight here. Firestone Walker. Gail, take us through this. This is exciting.
Well, for another release that we're having. I think one of the most sought beer among the whales is the Sukaba. Probably everybody's familiar with Sukaba. The whole Abacus beer that became Sukaba in 2012. It's a Firestone Walks barrel-aged barley wine. So it's coming out on the January 17th. So keep your eyes open. And there was a little development this year because I think Brinsol, I think I'm going to butcher. Brinsol, yeah. He actually this year, he let it go and said, Sukaba is actually a blend of two beers, which everybody was kind of, So this is their vintage number 5. So keep an eye for it. It's coming out. It's a 13.5% barrel-aged barley wine this year. So that's one of the great beer there's around. Too bad we can't find it.
And I believe Firestone Walker, is that a beer that they box? Is that one of them that they box?
Put it in a box. It's a red. There's a red label. That has the whole label and stuff. Yeah. It's amazing. A lot of vanilla, dark chocolate, coconut, whatever you can think on a barley wine, you get on that beer. So and they did an amazing job of that. So keep
love barley wines.
And if you have an extra, send my way.
I did see 18 was out this last week, and of course it sold the moment it hit shelves everywhere. So Firestone Walker's we're in the peak of their release season. Also releasing here soon is Stone's got their latest Enjoy By. I don't know the distribution of this guy, but it's a Valentine's Day release. I believe they've done a Valentine's Day release here, or an Enjoy By Valentine's Day last couple of years. So 214 of 15.
Matt, you want to run down those hops? That's in that beer?
No, I don't. Yeah, this is. I'll give it a shot because I'm game. But this IPA's got Calypso, Super Galena, Simcoe, Delta, Target, Amarilla, Matuka, Citra, Cascade, New Zealand, Nelson, Sauvignon, and Australian Galaxy. So that's. I don't know how much they put in those, but
there was no space for more hops on the fermenter.
Yeah, and apparently not on the bottle label either. So they had to stop or else run out of ink. Schmaltz Brewing has got St. Jubilation coming out. It's a barrel aged Belgian style imperial sour rye ale.
Oh man,
Woo! That was a lot.
I want that.
That was for the original jubilation for that. I think that's the play on the word.
There we go. All right. St. Arnold out of Houston, Texas, also in the sainthood. Bishop's Barrel number 8. It's a Russian Imperial Stout aged in bourbon. We were talking about that. Just about everybody's doing a bourbon aged barreled beer, and I'm not really. I'm okay with it. I'm not really upset about that. So they can bring in. New Belgium has got Portage out. It's a porter with Target and Nugget hops. Jester King has got Autumnal Dichotomous. An oaked aged saison that's coming out here on the 9th.
Love Jester King. Love those guys.
Yeah, they do some crazy stuff. Oscar Blues has got Pinner Throwback IPA. I think I've seen this somewhere on the shelf. It's dry hopped with a couple experimental hops, and it's a sessionable 4.9 ABV. The brewery has got Mocha Wednesday. That comes only to the Reserve Society members. That's coming out in the next couple of weeks. Any other releases you can think of, Michael, that are coming out that are worthy mention?
Honestly, I'm so out of the loop when it comes to sort of new hyped beers. I love finding what I can, but I'm out of the trading game for a while now.
I'm gonna be tapping my Imperial Milk Stout, so
Randy's Homebrewing. Randy Gardner Jr.'s Homebrewing.
You need to catch your name. You got to market it.
Yeah. RG2. There you go.
RG2.
Milky Thursday.
On the from the festivals lineup, we've got Big Beers and Barley Wine Festival in Vail, Colorado. That's this weekend. Key Largo Brew in the Bay is in Key Largo, Florida tomorrow. I do believe that is a festival that our friends from South Florida go to every year. So look for some pictures on the Google Plus community from those crazy people. Brew Ha Ha in Saginaw, Michigan is the 9th. That's also tomorrow. The Big Philly Beer Fest is in Philadelphia, PA, of all places, this weekend. And the World of Beer Festival in Columbia is January 17th. And this will be the second or third year in a row I've been meaning to come to that, and I'm not going to, actually. Tell us a little bit about that. Are you involved in that? Are you going to be there?
Yes, I've been involved with the Columbia World Beer Festival since 2009, the first year. And this year I'm going to be first time actually professionally involved, working for my distributor. We've got several brands involved. But it's a crazy, crazy time. All-day affair. Love it.
As they break it up into 2 sessions. There's a morning and evening session?
That's correct. The first one is from noon to 4. The second one is from 6 to 10. Your first one's got your more serious beer people. The evening one's kind of a frat party, but it's a good time. It's a good time.
Kind of a frat party. All right. Well, there's a place for that. So, go to Columbia, South Carolina for that next weekend. And
there is one more beer festival.
Go for it.
It's in Greenville. It's the day after World Beer Festival. It's called the Biggest Little Beer Festival. It's at Barley's, which is a sort of, I think they've got a few location pizza restaurant, but they do really well with beer too. And the Biggest Little Beer Festival has a lot of cool, fun beers, but not a huge selection. And they do it on a Sunday, which is kind of unique, but it's because Monday is Martin Luther King Day, and so that's your recovery day.
All right, that's your recovery day. So everybody's got an extra day to sleep it off. So, well, the banks and the government employees do, I guess. So, all right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it with this week. This has been a great show. We've gone a little bit long, but Michael's been I didn't want to stop him. I mean, the knowledge and the the guy's got a microbiology degree or something, because all the words. Economics, all right. Well,
you're like Bill Belichick, the economics degree coaching football. You got an economics degree and you're like writing books on the sour beers.
Yeah.
Pronounce the words he did.
I can't pronounce half of what's on Randy's shirt, but he did a fantastic job. We really appreciate him. Go out and get on Amazon and get this American Sour Beers. Sour beers are only getting bigger and more prevalent, and you can go into those beers knowing what's going on inside. And if you're a home brewer, Mad Fermentationist is his blog, and lots of great questions there. Michael's he's very accessible, and we appreciate his time here tonight. So really, thanks everybody. Until next week, when we are going to have Alaskan Brewing on, which is always a hoot. If you haven't had a chance, go watch our hangout with them from a couple of years ago. These guys are insane. I'm looking forward to it. Their beer is delicious and really only distributed on the West Coast, but we're going to be doing that next week. So tune in for that. Until then, find some great friends. Get some great beer and mind those P's and Q's.
This has been Pints and Quarts, brought to you by Craft Beer Nation. You can show your support for our podcast by subscribing to our content on YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, or our website, craftbeernation.org. Thanks for listening.